Hello, I'm James Butler. This is my colleague Stuart Emerson. We both work at Social Enterprise UK. Keener observers in the room may notice that that's not Nancy. Nancy's unfortunately got childcare issues. Stuart stepped into the breach. He's director for ESSA UK, works a lot in the West Midlands, which is a hotspot of activity for social value. So he's very, very strong on the practical aspects of it, and he will be talking more later. What we'd like to do is a presentation which addresses the reasons that you've come here, where the Act comes from, which we'll touch on, the current state of play, policy, research, practical examples, which I guess is the meat of the presentation, what's next, and then possibly open up for a discussion, because I know there's some giants of social value in the room here, and we want to hear from you as well. Hello. The Social Value Act, 2012, came into force January 2013. We, as an organisation, campaigned for it in our pre-election manifesto in 2010, and Chris White, Conservative MP, drew, I think, number 1 in the ballot for the private members' ballot, was quite impressed by what we had to say, wanted to help the VCSE sector, and basically said, what can I do to help? Initially, the Social Value Act was targeted primarily at social enterprises. It quickly emerged that we couldn't really do that, that it had to be broader, and what we ended up was an enabling act which supports, yes, it does support the VCSE sector, but it does an awful lot more as well. It applies to all public sector bodies as contracting regulations in England. Scotland has a different regime. Wales has a different regime. It's slightly complicated for English public bodies operating in Wales. And PCCs, CCGs, central government. And I suppose the key thing is there's a huge variety of what's going on across the piece. It's a very weak piece of legislation. It's a duty to consider. What does duty to consider mean? Does it mean, yes, I've considered it? Does it mean a stronger version of that? Do I need to audit what I'm doing? No, it's a very weak duty to consider. And that has resulted in really flexible interpretations, which is good. It also has resulted in some authorities not doing what they should be doing as well. Thresholds, it was tied, the original act was tied to the pre-2015 public sector contract regulations, which set a threshold of about €130,000. The first social value review by Lord Young identified a problem in that because the public sector regulations 2015 introduced a light touch regime, and the only threshold mentioned was €750,000. The problem with that is that would have lifted the vast majority of procurement exercises out of the Social Value Act's regime. There was a really helpful amendment which, using convoluted language, said the old regulations, threshold of the old regulations apply, even though the old regulations don't really exist anymore. Now there's a problem which we think we've identified. We think there's a subsequent amendment to the Social Value Act which sets the threshold at €750,000. That is more a presentational problem than anything, because, as I'm sure many of you know, the best value guidance says ignore the threshold. Nevertheless, that's something we're talking to with government, and we're very pleased this morning to have heard that there will be a second review of the Social Value Act, which the Minister announced this morning. It doesn't really apply to anything other than services, or services where you've got a bit of goods and a bit of works. However, there's been quite a lot of movement in that, which I'll come to in a second. Lord Young's review was led by Lord Young. Hazel Blears and Chris White were also on the team. It was useful. Possibly the two most useful things to come out of it was the resetting of the threshold, which we now think there's a problem with. And the second aspect of it was said that there'd be a further review, which has been announced today. Nevertheless, it is useful. It was useful as a way of keeping the agenda going. State of social enterprise. We asked our members and the movement, social enterprise movement, what's your perception of social enterprise, of social value? They like it, they're seeing it, there's awareness of it. However, you can see from those statistics that it hadn't really bitten into a lot of our members and the movement's work. Policy, this is probably the most dynamic aspect of the update. The public sector contract regulations opens the door, I think, for social value. It's different language, it's more inclusive. It talks about reserving contracts for social enterprises and VCSE sector organisations. It allows social and environmental considerations explicitly to be considered. From that, you've also got the utility contract regulations. Utilities are excluded from the Social Value Act. It talks about the utility contract regulations talk about social and environmental considerations as well. And from there, we've also had some draft guidance attached to the bus services bill, which says that social value can be a consideration in the contracting of bus services. Now, one would think that bus services are services, they're actually considered a utility. So for the very first time, we've had explicit acknowledgement from the government that social value can be considered in the tendering of a utility, which I think is a small step, but I think you can see the direction of travel in that respect. I've also seen a couple of PPNs late last year in December. PPN 1116 is about steel. Now you remember the steel crisis was in the news probably about 12 months ago with Tata Steel. Government basically put a call out, what can we do to help people buy British steel? There was an initial PPN which said you can kind of consider social value in purchasing of steel, so the environmental cost of transporting it, the cost or the benefit of employing British workers, that's a social consideration, but that only applied over 10 million. Subsequent PPE 16 changes the game. It's a game changer. It says when we say steel, we mean any material, which is kind of an interesting definition of steel. It also means, it says, there's no threshold. If you consider it to be a major project, you can consider social considerations. My reading of that is that social value now applies to goods and works if your authority considers it a major project. Now, clearly, there's a difference between a major project for a county, local authority county, and from a district authority. So, if you've not had a look at it. It's really flexible, a really helpful little note which applies to pretty much anyone. The balanced scorecard, we're going to see more of that approach. I think what government has realised is that social value is a reasonably clever way of allowing the public sector to buy British. That's my guess of what's happening. So the industrial strategy, one of the 10 pillars in the strategy is about procurement. It's obviously something we're going to be feeding into that and saying you can go further and mesh with kind of social value act considerations. We've actually got quite an interesting, if we're right about the social value act threshold being inadvertently raised to 750,000 euros, we have an interesting situation. The act was never meant to apply to goods, works and utilities. Through the PPNs, social value can be considered above a threshold of 0. For services, which the Act was meant to apply to, at the threshold of about 100,000 quid, it now only applies above 750,000 euros. So there's an inconsistency there which government needs to address. And again, I go back to the round table and the second review. I think government realises it's a bit of a messy situation which needs to be sorted. Legislation says one thing, advice says another. So a strict reading of the Social Value Act, on a conservative reading, it really, you might not want to do much, but there's a guidance increasingly saying, go and do interesting stuff, we don't mind, you're not going to get challenged, here's the permission to do it. Again, that needs to be sorted. In terms of research, there's 3 or 4 interesting pieces of research which have been done over the last, 3 or 4 years. Communities Count we did with primarily with housing associations, who were one of the first organisations to really run with social value. And there's some interesting case studies in there. It is a little bit old, but if you've not read it, download it, it's free. As we see, measurement is the biggest challenge. Perhaps we can talk about that when we come around to you. Procuring for good. We looked at English local authorities last year, how they were using social value. It's a very mixed picture. There's some great case studies in the report. Broadly, what we see is 4 categories of councils. Embracers, ones which are using social value considerations in really interesting ways. Those are predominantly but not exclusively large metropolitan areas. We think that's a capacity issue, probably, and that if you're a large authority, you've got a large procurement and commissioning team compared to a smaller local authority. One might also perceive that they've got more deprivation to deal with and more challenges to deal with, so they've got to be more innovative. That may be but we're guessing why there's a difference, really. We've got compliers, which are councils which do the bare minimum. They can justify that they are following the Social Value Act, but not really pushing the boat out very much. And we have got bystanders, which are the ones where social value has kind of just gone way past their head. Those typically are district councils, typically rural, typically got small numbers of staff, typically don't have large procurement exercises, might use framework agreements, which again, the Social Value Act doesn't apply to framework agreements. So there's no real need to explore how interesting the Social Value Act can be. Now, interestingly, Morgan Sindel, shout out to them, and local government, did a similar survey towards the end of last year. They found, again, using different methodology and different questions, a similar kind of situation. About a third of local authorities across the board are using the Social Value Act quite a lot, a third are using it somewhat, a third aren't really engaging. So there is a mixed picture. I'd really recommend having a look at Procuring for Good. A question possibly for any local authority people in the room. I think there's about half of you are local authorities, judging by who signed up. Where do you think you fit in our category? The categories are subjective. They are. We didn't set out to try and name and shame, so you have to hunt around our website to try and find out the link. If you're that interested, come and talk to me. But I think that's a challenge to local authorities. Where are you as a self-assessment? These are kind of statistics of tiers. Again, that just reinforces what I was saying. Generally speaking, district councils are the ones not using the Act very much. Larger authorities, London boroughs, metropolitans, unitaries and counties tend to use the Act to a greater extent and more interesting ways. However, I would just like to give a shout out to one or two smaller local authorities. Now, my favourite of all is South Somerset District Councils. I've got a 2-page social value policy statement. which I think is just the epitome of common sense for a small council. It says what they want, it links it to their strategic objectives, and they say what they want from the people that they're tendering from. It can be done with a minimum of resource. Please take one of those away. Please have a look at Procuring for Good. Bigger authorities will want more complicated statements, but I don't think size should necessarily be a barrier to embracing social value. Now, that finding, the OJ barrier, is a guess. I think it's a guess based on the responses that we got. This is where, if we're right in thinking the Social Value Act's threshold has been inadvertently raised, this will be a problem for other authorities, who then say, actually, we don't need to do this. Let's not bother exploring it. How much do you weigh? We asked local authorities how much do they weight for social value in their internal scoring. And what we found was typically kind of 3, maybe 5% for the ones who are dabbling their toes in the water, 5 to 10% for kind of most of the ones who are using it positively. The embracer categories, the larger metropolitan areas, some of them are going up to 20 or 30%. That's total scoring, that's not within the quality section. So I think there's some interesting work on that some councils, particularly the cooperative network of councils, are using, trying to change the nature of their local economy, trying to make businesses more cooperative. For those who are kind of into regen, it's kind of a Cleveland model approach to changing the nature of their local economy. So procurement is being used as a tool to deliver political priorities and political change. Somewhat of a personal reflection. What we find with local authorities, there is a debate, it seems to be, whether you score for social value or whether in the process of commissioning you get the outcome that you want through what you procure. Once you've considered social value, you break up the contract into different bits. My feeling is that the best authorities probably wait for it, score for it when looking at tenders. I think that sends out quite a signal to the market that they want business to adapt and to change. Work that my colleague Nancy has been doing with health authorities seems to suggest that 5% is the minimum really needed to make that psychological impression on businesses. Size matters. Larger authorities, it seems to be easier for them to use social value. I came to the research with a prejudice, and that was, as a local government person, I thought councils would be really good at this, and I thought where they outsourced their procurement function to a joint partnership arrangement or to a private company, I naturally assumed that those third parties would be pretty rubbish at social value. That's totally not the case. There's some brilliant examples of private companies working in tendering and outsourcing who are far better than a lot of local authorities when it comes to social value considerations. I found that a real challenge to my prejudices. And indeed, if you see the awards later today, I think one of the private companies has been shortlisted. So there's some really good work happening with those third-party organisations. It isn't necessarily a tool to help social enterprises. What we're seeing, I'll talk about this after Stuart, a lot of local authorities are seeing it as a way of buying locally. It's politically imperative. They want to maximise the spend of their local spend and the impact that it has in their local communities. That's not the same as what the government is suggesting, which is kind of buy British, and it's not quite the same as what we as a membership organisation would like them to see, which is to buy social. And I think that's an interesting debate which needs to pan out a little bit. How do you balance social and local? Can you have internationally social-minded organisation winning contracts? We try to map the best councils with no firm conclusions. The only thing which seemed to make any sense to me was that the embracers tend to be local authorities which are on the periphery of exciting places. So it wasn't necessarily in a London, it'd be kind of the councils on the edge of London, with perhaps greater challenges, fewer opportunities for development and regeneration. We see that again and again in the north Manchester. It's not necessarily the central Manchester, it's the organisations around it. Same for Liverpool. But it's hard to generalise. Does it save any money? Obviously, age of austerity. Does a social value approach save local authorities money? Hard to say. There are examples, individual examples where procurement officers who responded to our FOIs said, it does, but I can't tell you about it, which wasn't that helpful. Or more often they say, we can say convincingly that it doesn't cost any more, and we like what we get. I'm currently undertaking some work with CCGs on social value. It's a much more complicated procurement framework that they're operating in. It seems to be more the case that social value is used at the commissioning stage. It doesn't seem to filter through to tendering. Considerable variation between the CCGs. There's no obvious pattern. Joint commissioning with LAs, with local authorities, seems to be a positive influence. So it seems to be that councils are ahead of the game in terms of CCGs. And I'm channeling Donald Trump at the bottom with capital as an exclamation mark. You know, we've got the move to STPs, we've got accountable care organisations possibly coming in. The whole landscape has been torn up 2 or 3 times for CCGs in the last decade. So it's a really messy situation where we can't draw any conclusions. That piece of research has been done with National Voices. We hope to publish it within the next kind of 6 to 8 weeks. But I think the findings are going to be less clear than for the local authorities' work. Now, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so as James mentioned, my name's Stuart Emerson. I'm the Regional Director for the West Midlands region. But I've also worked on our Social Enterprise Place programme, which I'll touch on after I've gone through these slides. I think just reflecting a little bit on what James has just said, in terms of contextualising some of that, the Social Value Act is still relatively new. It's evolving. It's quite a fluid concept for some local authorities, and yeah, it was interesting to hear that there will be a roundtable set up to take that forward. But what James has just taken you through there is actually probably some of the most kind of forensic analysis there is out there at the moment, and really part of that analysis is not necessarily naming and shaming, actually sharing best practice, and allowing some local authorities to see what's going on in different parts of the country where it's working well and what lessons can be learned. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the slides that Nancy was going to take you through with regards to some of the work we've done with local authorities and CCGs around building healthy partnerships. And then I'm going to talk about our programme, our Social Enterprise Place programme, which really is partially a vehicle for helping unlock some of the social value that we're talking about today. So some of the learning that's taken place from the work we've done, we've got 12 steps to help guide you through this. And to help embed social value in the healthcare and commission. Of course, you know, this is a key area for local authorities, even in sort of some areas in terms of adult and social care. You know, councils who take advantage of the 2 or 3% precept rise, it will actually only cover about 25% of the shortfall. So local authorities are looking at alternative models of delivery as to how they can tackle some of these challenges. So some of this is quite common sense, I suppose. You know, it makes good sense. What we found is to bring together the appropriate partners to form that working group from very, very early on in the process. Part of that is educative, so it's whether that's in local authorities or outside the organisation, just bringing together some of that that learning about social value, so that everyone's on the same page, so to speak. Reviewing existing local priorities. So quite often after sort of various conversations, you do tend to see some of the priorities can align quite well, actually, with local authorities, social enterprises and other organisations, albeit with slightly different titles sometimes, but actually focusing on some of those challenges that face the social enterprise or the local authorities around exclusion, employment, etc. What worked well is after that process had taken place, to actually obviously consult with the objectives with the various stakeholders to get that buy-in, and then to draft that social value priority and proposals. Some of the work that Nancy was involved in identified coming up with proposals that could be worked in well in advance of the kind of process. So, 6-month lead-in time. It's no good trying to add the social value in afterwards as a kind of tick box exercise. It just doesn't end up being delivered. So that's critical. Getting the commissioners in the room early on. Consulting with the service providers and service users about the outcomes you want to achieve. Again, some really important learning. Communicating with the market. I mean, I think one of the things that came out of some of the West Midlands kind of projects was that continual need to communicate. And the ongoing assessment to continue to make sure they're clear about the agendas and the social value responses are going to be compared and verified, so they can be monitored throughout the process. Salford's a great kind of case study to take a look at. And then just the last two, in terms of awarding the contract, being clear about how the social value will be monitored, which I just touched on. Really important. Historically, it has been used perhaps to, as I said, tick box exercise to help win the contract, and then the delivery kind of falls apart. So the monitoring is absolutely fundamental to the delivery of social value through the process. And I'm sure if anyone's got any kind of follow-up questions, either here today or afterwards with either Nancy or Nick Temple, that's kind of ongoing work in light of the challenges around health and care sector. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Social Enterprise Place Programme. So this started about 3 years ago up in Oston Moor, and it came from one of our members, actually, Clive Hurst, based up in the northwest, up towards Blackpool. And he'd noticed a collection of kind of rural social enterprises that were collaborating, working together in a geographical area on the fringes, not able to access some of the kind of traditional support that others might have. And we carried out a bit of a pilot with support from Santander to see whether there's something we could do here around supporting the sector, driving awareness, education about what social value is. From that time, the programme and the award has grown to 20 places and hotspots around the UK, and now that are accredited, awarded with the social enterprise place status, that SE UK is working with to support and capacity build the sector there. The key aims of the programme are to raise awareness, I'd say build the market through some of our campaigns such as Buy Social, Social Saturday. The businesses, the social enterprises are first and foremost businesses who need customers. And so it's important that the general public, as well as those larger business organisations who can work with those smaller social enterprises through their supply chains, are aware of the local social enterprises. So in order to sort of the process to become a social enterprise place is pretty straightforward. You need to be a geographical zone, so it could be a hamlet right through to a zone such as Cornwall area. It's tending to be boroughs or county councils that actually apply for the status, and that seems to work quite well. And critically, a stakeholder group needs to come together. That is made up of large and small businesses, the social enterprise sector, local authorities, the university, because, as was touched on at the beginning of the day, and what the Prime Minister recently referenced in her speech, is the challenges we face will require cross-sectoral solutions. And so part of this programme is getting those people round the table to take the programme forward. So we've been working with, I'd say, these 20 places, again reflecting some of the fact that they're not all, not central London, not central Birmingham, though we would like to see that take place, and we will be working with them to hopefully get them to become a social enterprise place. But some of these places that are, as I say, not necessarily connected to some of the kind of metropolitan areas. So we've had 32 applications to date, and 19 have been accepted. So although we're trying to grow the sector, trying to increase the number of places, we do say no where there is not sufficient buy-in from those different organisations, and to maintain the kind of kudos of winning that place status. We support them with town drives. So we've managed to sort of work with the local, regional, national media. We get political buy-in, so we've had buy-in from the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, because things move very quickly, and ministers, local authority leaders have been working with us to help kind of shine a light on the sector through social enterprise safaris, visiting these places, showcasing them to the different organisations. Crucially, we're trying to build a network. The participants of the programme meet twice a year to share best practice about what's happening. So linking back in with what James said earlier, how are the different local authorities using it in Salford or in Croydon or in Sunderland and Gwynedd? And that's worked really well, actually, to share some of that local knowledge. The programme ties into local and national campaigns. As mentioned, the Social Saturday, the hashtag Who Knew campaign was really helpful in terms of raising awareness about the sector and the projects that are taking place, sometimes kind of beneath the surface that people don't necessarily know about. And we're doing some interesting sort of collaborations with them. We had just in Digbeth last year, at the end of last year, we brought together the 20 places to meet at a social enterprise, Changes UK, and we produced an impact report of how becoming a social enterprise place had assisted the sector. So I'd recommend that's on the website, and take a look at the social enterprise place page. But there's all kinds of interesting things there in terms of, Plymouth, for example, working with the local authority who ended up offering finance to support the sector. They introduced a cabinet member for social enterprise. Different things that different areas are doing to support the sector. What have we learned? I mentioned cross-sectoral. I think that's a sort of theme running through the day. Raising awareness again. It's been fantastic getting on board these key players in the region to support the sector. Building customers and markets, generating income for those social enterprises continues to be vital. this is quite interesting. Some of the places have been using the social enterprise status to leverage further support to unlock opportunities for finance. So I know actually Plymouth again have managed on the back of the place status to win additional funding support from Power to Change, for example. And there's a pilot taking place there. Others I know, Digbeth recently utilised it in one of their applications to secure fast disappearing European funding. And I know Oxfordshire, the county there, has equally been using it to really give itself that national profile. But it's important. The programme's not overly prescriptive, so different areas have different strengths and advantages, and some of the things we've learned that creates a social enterprise place. So as ever, it needs social entrepreneurs, leaders. I think it was the Marks and Spencer's talk earlier talked about strong leaders are vital, which really resonated, I think, in these times. Be they in the public, private, or third sector. The statistics from our State of Social Enterprise survey, which comes out every 2 years, and will be next one published this year, which is the biggest kind of survey into the state of the sector, found that obviously a lot of social enterprises are focused around areas of need and areas of deprivation, and that is reflected somewhat in the places programme and applications that we receive. And the geography and the location. So some of these areas, as has been mentioned, on the Birmingham, Staffordshire, for example, which I think is applying to become a status soon, is a really interesting example. So you've got the Midlands engine. It's kind of technically part of the Midlands, but caught between Manchester and Birmingham. And you've got the Northern Powerhouse, and it feels where does it find its place and its space to actually have a voice about what's taking place locally, and the programmes can be used effectively in that way. It's vital to have the institutional support, as I mentioned, part of the stakeholder group. So yes, local authorities have been hit incredibly hard in terms of their one, just keeping pace with legislation, but also the cuts to funding. But they are still key partners and allies in terms of the strategic support that they can provide. And the final one there, history and culture. So, places such as Cornwall's quite a kind of independent way of doing things. Even, down to wanting to be called Kernow. And have its own language, and Salford, with its cooperative history, has actually well placed to take forward and be a leader in terms of some of the work we've done in this space. So what next? So the programme continues to grow. We continue to do joint working and more intertrading between places. We're looking to continue to grow the number of places, and we receive applications on an ongoing basis. And interestingly, we've been doing some work internationally. So we just relatively recently welcomed our first international place, which is the Veneto region in Italy, which has a very strong cooperative movement, and we'll be looking to do some more twinning and partnership work with them. And there are opportunities for social enterprises who are increasingly looking to export to grow their markets, and to demonstrate some of the learning and the leadership that's happened in this country, and to share that best practice abroad. The next Social Enterprise World Forum will take place in New Zealand, and without giving too much away, they've recently applied with a very strong application, so it would be fitting in this year that they would be the next place. But we've seen applications and interest in what we're doing around social value, what local authorities are doing, the transition from charities to social enterprises across the country from our international partners. We'll continue to do more research of the type that James has been involved in. We'll be looking to take some of the learning across those 20 places into areas where it hasn't happened yet, and maybe you're from some of those places. In a session earlier where we had a speaker from Leeds, which is doing fantastic work, and it would make sense for them to be part of the programme. And then finally, really, devolution and Brexit. I think this programme and this agenda is ever more important in light of Brexit, in light of the lack of funding that's coming, whether that be from European partners, but the need for resilient communities looking at how they can work together to capacity build the sector and look at these new models via social enterprise. James, I noticed there some Esperanto.
No.
Esperanto? No? Oh, I thought it was, but maybe not.
Stuart's going to spoil my,
all right.
spoil my kind of gag. Apparently we're leaving the EU. I'm breaking the rules now by standing up because I've been sat down for too long. And I'm quite short, so you can't see at the back. I was going to say, what language does everyone think this is?
Polish.
Polish, no, it's Esperanto. It'd be Czech if it was Polish.
Yeah,
okay.
Quite right.
So we're leaving the EU. We're going to have to redesign our procurement framework. Now, an earlier seminar just next door by BWP and HCT suggested that it's going to take some time to unpick everything, and I think that's right. We'll see the Great Reform bill come through, which will take out all the kind of re-own all the European legislation. But I think already we're seeing with the PPNs from the second half of last year a distinctive by British procurement approach for public procurement. I can't see the government getting away from that. I think that's an agenda they want to own. I think when you're talking about buying Trident submarines, when you're buying HS2, the logic for the government for those big procurement regimes has got to be to buy British steel and employ British workers.
Just quickly come in there, James, on that. I think that's also a real opportunity there, because speaking to a lot of local authorities, they are very keen to work with social enterprises because they recognise that money, it's not just the buy local, it's the buy social. The money is reinvested back into the local communities and economies, and they're looking to retain that well. So I think I was at an event in Staffordshire earlier in the week, and working with the Chambers of Commerce up there, actually, who have their own social value forum, which I thought was really interesting. And the chief exec there described social enterprises as very loyal to their communities, which I thought was an interesting way of thinking about it, because they are. And I think that is the drive for the government, but it's an opportunity for social enterprise to sell that part of their work.
Now, something new. Nobody knows this. Or in fact, lots of people might know this, but haven't realised what it means. So you've probably heard in the press, government's grinding to a halt because of Brexit. All the civil servants are going into the Department for Brexit and for international deals. This is statutory instruments. Statutory instruments are secondary legislation, so you have Act of Parliament, and the secondary instrument explains that. So to give you an example, an Act of Parliament might say all children under the age of 5 get a free piece of fruit every day. The statutory instrument will say, by fruit we also mean bananas, which are technically a herb, but so we can give. So that's what you get the idea. That's what a secondary instrument can do. But they can also incorporate EU legislation and stuff. It's a very clever piece of legal tool. This is statutory instrument by year. If you go back further, you've got a gradual increase as government tried to explain what is going on. You've got a rise here, which is the coalition. Statutory instruments are harder to dismiss. So because they're technical, you don't have the level, generally speaking, of scrutiny that an Act of Parliament does. that's easier to get away with in the coalition to do stuff. And then suddenly, bang, drops off. So we've got fewer bits of governments doing fewer things by nearly half than it was a couple of years ago. Which I just think that's stark. It's a stark illustration. Statutory instruments are not the only thing government does, of course, but it's an illustration of the fact that Brexit is having an effect on government. Government is doing less than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So, in the context of redesigning a procurement framework or taking the agenda forward, I think there's just less capacity to do things by government. So I think we've got to bear that in mind about what's next. Has government stopped governing? Kind of, a bit. And we've got this push-pull, I think, you've got, as Stuart was talking about, you've got a government industrial strategy saying, you know what, we want to be able to encourage public procurers to buy British. You've got devolution, you've got local authorities wanting to redesign their procurement frameworks, generally speaking, to support local companies. Now, is there a sweet spot in between where social might exist, where social value might exist? I think that's our opportunity for our movement to try and explain how we can link the two, how social enterprises and social value is buying British, but it's also buying locally to an extent. And I think that's an ongoing debate which we'd like to share with you for the next kind of 20 minutes or so. What we thought we'd do now, because you've heard us for far too long, is hear from you about what you're doing. I think I'm right in saying about half are local authorities, half are private organisations, whether it's VCSE sector, as well as answer any questions that you've got about our presentation. There was an awful lot. It was quite a kind of text heavy. I get that, but it is a complicated and fast moving situation, policy front, I think. Over to the floor. In Esperanto, the first question has got to be in Esperanto as well. That's the other thing.
So, are there any local authorities in the room? Anyone from? Yeah. So, do you want to? I don't know. Take a gentleman in the back and then lady at the front. Kick off with some of your kind of experiences.
Are you an embracer? Yeah. Do you think you're an embracer?
I suppose I was struck by the category because I think you've got categories within any organisation. So the fact that anybody's here from a local authority probably might say you're an embracer, but then when you get back to the branch, whatever the word was, where people put their head in the sand. I think for me it's more about challenges. And I was here at the event last year, kind of struck, it kind of feels a bit the same. I can't shake that feeling. There might be something that might differ a local authority. The big question for us is if you're incorporating social value into a tender, I kind of love this idea that people think a tender is a really exact piece of science as well. A lot of tenders are really badly written. But any private organisation can address social value.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was your point about it doesn't necessarily open things up to social enterprises. So on a personal level, you might feel and you want a social enterprise to get the business. Any organisation can kind of address it and kind of modify it in a way that even if they don't do it, because it's an inexact science, you can't prevent that. And so that I would say it's a first. I've got more challenges than that, but I'll stop there. It's a big challenge for us when everyone has a discussion.
Should we take 2 or 3?
Yeah.
Observations, questions? Local
authority?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Halton, we are, I consider us an embracer.
You were.
You were.
Yeah, we're continuing to grow and it's continually reflective practice.
Mm-hmm.
And things change all the time and you think, oh, what are you talking about then? And you continually change it and so I think around buying social, reserve contracts, looking more into that now. I mean, we've just got, and then in our board, we've just got a wealth of provision there, and we don't need to go out further.
No.
A lot of things, but again, it's how we can be clever with our contracts and how we put them out, and we do a lot of pre-procurement, opportunity for collaboration, so smaller organisations can work in partnership with the larger ones, so it's not just health contracts that are health providers winning them, it's all around collaboration and with a smaller network. So again, it's just an evolving piece of work. The one that we can't cross a mouse, and again, if there was a magic science to know, is actually how you come up with the metrics. Again, I mean, we're good at the number crunching in terms of, sort of we can tell you quantities. I mean, I've dabbled, I've tried, but really, what price can you put on someone's well-being? And I was talking to somebody downstairs saying, well, the person's feeling well isn't because of that provision, that social value, because they're working with multi-agencies and different providers, so it's hard to pinpoint it. And I've looked at global exchange, I've looked at how we can work up. Look, my day job is procurement, so again, where I would say anybody looking to adopt that, you need the commitment, and it is turning into a full-time job. And again, it's sort of, as it evolves and, with austerity, maybe it's another department that might be set up to deal with it and working in conjunction with ourselves. So
And just quickly, I'd say Holton is a bit of an exemplar when it comes to social value. And how long has that process taken, do you think? And has that been driven because of the state of finances? Has there been explicit political leadership? How has it evolved?
do you want me to be honest?
Yes.
It was to do with the health and social value, health and social value programme.
Yep.
And it wasn't for that.
Okay.
Procurement weren't even invited to that event.
No.
And they are like an enabler for it. And it wasn't for that, it was sort of taking that forward.
Right.
Working with core people.
Yep.
The facilitation for Social Enterprise UK. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have done anything. So it was a case of having the trust in our members, our board, who had sort of like faith in me particularly, to be able to do things and say, yeah, well, we're happy. And as we're achieving more because we need more for less, it's quite high on the agenda now. So
Sure.
people are listening and they are actually giving a lot more airtime.
Interesting. Okay.
And it wasn't difficult to do because we kept it definitely complicated.
No.
Shall I just address the question at the back, sir? You're absolutely right. Any company, any organisation can do social value. I would love it if the Social Value Act specified social enterprises, which I think in the very earliest draft it did, but that was ruled impossible to do and undesirable to do. And Interserve, who are helping hosting today, are a great example of a company which can and does do social value really well and has embraced it as a company approach to business. You know what? I'm fine with that. If we're nudging corporate behaviour in the right direction, that's great. And I think we're at one of those turning points. If I was a Leninist, which I'm not, I'd be saying we've got a crisis of capitalism, and I'd be looking at trade flows reducing. I'd be looking at Brexit. I'd be looking at Trump and saying something is going wrong, and we're about to have a revolution. Now I'm not, because I'm not a Leninist, but I think there is a crisis of confidence in capitalism. I think there's a problem in the way that our economy is structured. And we really need to nudge poor performing corporates into a nicer, more social space. And social value can do that, help do that. And that would be my take on your comment.
I suppose the only thing I would say in return is I think some of it's not real, because that's the only thing in terms of tender, people address it. How many contracts are stopped because they're not delivering social value? I should imagine it's less than real.
Can I just say that social value is actually a contractual obligation with us as well. So some contracts do have actually like targets in there, so they don't, some are quite loose. And if they don't, then that is taken really sort of serious as well. If you're not.
That's my point, is that you look at it seriously, and I've never heard of any contract terminated because of
We've not been in that position yet because everybody sends their returns and everybody is achieving. So we haven't.
It's about monitoring it. Yeah.
So again, it's down to monitoring.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, go for it. Now take the gentleman at the back, unless it was that point you were going to make, and then the lady at the back.
Croydon's
Croydon's also really good, by the way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a social enterprise place.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've been on, Croydon's been on a huge journey of social value from the forefront of the Social Value Act, publishing the toolkit, and our
Yeah.
core commissioning strategy embraces social value at the core part of our business activity. And I'm really proud of the way the organisation has worked with our business community, but also our own section social enterprise community. And we found that our private business partners have also embraced our approach. And we've been on a strategic journey in setting out what our business means and being very articulating what that is in practice. And it is all about ensuring we get core service delivery, but what matters to us as an organisation is our strategic objectives. We're here to ensure that our residents and our communities get the best place, get the best healthcare and support and education, and that's what we do as a business, and therefore our partners are encouraged to do the same. And likewise, we have also inbuilt contractual obligations now within our core contracts. If you're failing on one of social value, then there's a strong KPI there, then there's a big discussion around that. Why is this not working? And there are penalties and other serious consequences. Again, we're not there yet, we're achieving.
That's why we love procurement officers.
A question at the back?
I work actually for a social housing provider.
Mm-hmm.
So we have completely embraced social value act. My background really wasn't in housing, so it actually surprised me how much social value is valued, I guess, within the housing sector. We too have contractual agreements with our suppliers, and it's my job to do the monitoring, which is interesting because I know, and they probably know, that they will not lose the contract if they do not meet their social value obligations. But it's my job to kind of threaten that a lot.
Sounds like you will as well.
Yeah, I do. A few enemies, but we're working on it. I have, because I'm new to social value, one, and I'm also new to housing. It's been an interesting journey regarding how the impact of things like the Social Value Act and how enforcement of it has changed the culture of an organisation. I think coming from the private sector, I think our social value department was minuscule compared to what it is in the housing sector. But it's an interesting kind of,
Have we got anybody from the private sector who'd like to? Can we hear from you, please? Both of you.
I'm into serve, but I'm going to give you a different perspective actually. So 2 years ago, I worked in the utility sector. And I know things would have changed slightly since then, but I was with National Grid. They didn't want to hear any of this. It was literally a CEO sticking his fingers in his ears. So in the UK, they spent £3 billion. That's what they were spending in the UK. And it was something to avoid, to try and run away from. It was, so
I'm busy speaking to,
so we did the first piece of work to look at how much we spend with SMEs. First time I'd even looked at the question. First time I even tried to answer it, 9% of that spend was SMEs. So disastrously low. And of that, one of them was, we spent an awful lot with one supplier to put the overhead in the retail. So then when you start to look at, the other, few £1 million that was spent off that big chunk, that was 2 years ago. So maybe, for the benefit of the doubt, they've moved on a lot since then, but I doubt it. I really doubt it. They do not have the competence or the understanding to even understand that I would suggest what social enterprise even is. Of course, Interserve is very different. I don't want to give that picture because they are doing something amazing. But if you look at Interserve, their entire turnover for the entire organisation is the profit annually of National Grid.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work still to be done. And it's got to be carrots and sticks that kind of do that.
I spend most of my time chasing them. And it's in their contracts, they have to do it.
Is it Paul?
Yes. I'm from Efficiency North. We're a social housing consortium or procurement consortium in Yorkshire on the region. And we've been doing social value now since 2010 in one form or another. started through original procurement frameworks, which interestingly sort of talk about at the start of the presentation about the social value act doesn't apply to framework. We've always done it, always had it embedded in it. And predominantly, you know, the start of the Efficiency North journey, we started sort of 2006. By 2010, you know, the vast majority of membership was local authorities. We are a local authority run organisation. We've just switched to the private sector to free up the bureaucracy and red tape to get things moving. But it's interesting when the sort of switch from the original early stages of doing the social value, the embedded employment skills into every single contract that's awarded through our frameworks. You know, the numbers were relatively low in size and scale in terms of the contracts that were awarded and the numbers of outputs that were generated. So obviously we looked at how it should all be put together. And it was usually based around contractors, existing apprentices, as opposed to project initiated apprentices. But more latterly, in the last couple of years, we've sort of changed our tact to place the emphasis more on project initiated apprentices. We still look at existing apprentices and support those existing apprentices, but the emphasis is placed on new ones. And by simply sort of changing a few words in the tender document at the start of the whole program process, you know, in 4 years we created, I think, 14 project initiated apprentices. We had something like 4,000 existing apprentice hours. Whatever that means. But in the last sort of 18 months of doing it where we've done it, we've already generated in excess of 80 last year, 121 this year. Simply by just working with contractors and saying, look, this is what we need to do. There's a huge skill shortage. You know, it's not booming, it's here. But the point I just would make is that within local authorities that we work with within the region, the vast majority of them still see it as a. But it's good that it's in there. But we have to sort of go through that process. Whereas the housing associations versus social providers are much more responsive towards that whole process. There are better local authorities than others that do want to see that added social value being put in place, but it's just interesting to sort of hear that sort of trendsetters and trailblazers that are sort of going that extra mile and making sure that the contracts are being terminated if necessary. And we look at that. We look at the contracts that will get awarded. You know, I've had contractors in. I've been sort of staring the whites of their eyes to say, look, if this does not happen, you're going to get black-carded. You won't do any more work going forward. So these carrots, these sticks, these baseball bats at times. But this is my first experience of this environment, and I've found it very, very enlightening today.
Good. I think I completely agree with what you said there, and there's a lot of some of the best work being done by housing associations. Actually, some really fantastic joined up approach with the people that it works closely with in the communities it knows better than anyone else. But you mentioned, Colin, about, I think there's still so much to be done around awareness, you know, people not knowing what the social enterprise is. So it's come a long way, I think, in its different guises. And so I think we did a bit of research recently, and it's moved from something like, in terms of general public awareness, 20%-ish to about just short of 50%. So that's great. There's obviously, the campaigns, the Social Saturday, Buy Social, work with partners such as yourself who have huge reach is really important. And I think it goes back to a bit about the local authorities, the fact that it's patches. How can we share that best practice and that work and give confidence perhaps to some of those local authorities who are firefighting that actually there's one kind of efficiency savings, but to incredible social value. that they can learn from and benefit from. So yeah, a lot of work done. And so the Act is, the Act's relatively young. So already we've had one review. Sounds like we're going to have another.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of reflections, just to kind of add on to that. Like, government, it's really hard for government to change stuff. And if you think of any government initiative, almost at any time, it's so hard to get people to do that. And yet the Social Value Act is being used by about a third of local authorities. And that's not something they're being told to do, it's an enabling act. So I think of any government initiative, it's probably had the most impact. In fact, it was a private member's bill, come to think of it. Of any act of parliament, it's probably had one of the most impact of anything I can think of, given the difficulty that government has making other organisations do things. Nevertheless, change is really difficult. One of the things we've just launched earlier this January was a campaign to try and reach our members to say, you've got local elections coming up in your counties outside London and mayoral authorities. Lobby your politicians to get procurement into your manifestos. And Croydon had Croydon's Labour manifesto in 2010. That's where the social value stuff came from. It was a pledge.
Yeah.
It was a pledge. And officers get that. They read them beforehand and said, what on earth can we do with that? And then they go to Google and then find out about it. And that's how change happens, So, when politicians come knocking on your door, that's what should be on your lips. What are you doing about social value? Are you promising it locally? And that's how change happens. Corporates, it is difficult. We appreciate that. We've got the corporate challenge for anybody who works in a corporate who wants to explore this. That's a pledge, a joint pledge to spend $1 billion on social enterprises before 2020. A joint pledge, so all of them will contribute to that. It is tough going, again, getting them to sign up to that, but when they start speaking to other corporates who understand their language, that's when the breakthrough comes, and they get it. And also through the stories which social value creates, the lives changed, the apprenticeships that have, taken people out of educational, poor education and given them a job and given them a route into a better life. And government itself is pretty poor on social value. There will be shortly, we're promised a review of how government itself has been applying social value. That came out of that was a pledge in the first Lord Young review. Now we've not seen that. I suspect that it's not great. So that will be an incentive for government itself. Once it starts getting those big government contracts, you'll see that follow on to the big corporates that fall into line, I think.
Just to add to that as well, I think, local authorities, as we mentioned, have gone through an incredibly difficult time, and so I think it's important to see them as partners who you can provide solutions to as well, not necessarily going to them, historically for grants or whatever, which kind of no longer exist. And the social enterprise community has lots of fantastic examples right across the full range of sectors that it can assist them as they go through this difficult stage. And the bisocial corporate challenge again is fantastic to have the partners involved in that who have committed to that pledge, but in many respects we're saying to them, we don't want you to spend more necessarily, it's just spending differently. So, it might be even at a very basic level of they order in water, you've got Volvic water or you've got Bellevue water, basically the same cost, but one donates 100% of its profits to WaterAid. It's a no-brainer, and through that kind of supply chain can have huge social impact. So there are lots of it's an optimistic time in many respects. And one of the first social enterprises that I ever went to visit when I got involved in the sector was two young social workers who had worked with the local authority to via a community asset transfer to convert disused swimming baths into a state-of-the-art international standard skateboarding centre to carry on the work they did with social work, to take some young kind of boys and girls and channel their energies into something productive. And I vividly remember them talking and telling me about all the challenges they faced. But they just said, and it's probably a bit of a cliche that many people have heard, but they said, you just need to, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. Just get on with it. And I think that's what you've been doing in Halton, actually, in terms of the Social Value Act, is you just got on with it and you're embracing it. And that is what the Act asks you to do. It's enabling in that sense. So I think there are big opportunities there.
I think we're nearly getting to 3 o'clock as well. Come and talk to us. Email us if you're in a rush to get off. We're happy to share best practice. We're happy to whiz over this presentation or any aspect to it. In terms of things I'd recommend you reading, from a local authority perspective, Procuring for Good, I humbly suggest, because I wrote it, that's a really good read if you've not read it. I'm happy to share the Secret Squirrel spreadsheet which says who's enabling and who's not with you, but don't tell anyone. It's not being recorded, this is it. Yeah. Equally, we've got training and support for organisations if you want to upskill some of your colleagues. Come and talk to us.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Hello. I've got a crappy headache.
Yeah, join the club.
Which is good.
Yeah, me too.